it's not enough anymore. So that means that every agency, and there's now more agencies, they've all niched down. So that isn't even enough to separate you from the crowd. I'm Kyle Racki, CEO of Proposify, and I've been running a business for the past 15 plus years since I was 24, and Proposify for the last 10 years. And so what I like to do is just share some of the lessons that I learned across product, marketing, sales, everything that I've learned running a business. So I have to give Alex James credit for this. He had this amazing post on LinkedIn that was all about niching. And so for a very long time, the general consensus was that if you run an agency business, that you need to be specialized. You need to be a super niche industry. They say the niche, niches are in the riches. There was a time in, I want to say that maybe the 2000s, anything pre-2000, where if you were an agency, the only customers that you could really sell were the ones that are down the road from you if you're general, right? And so I experienced this running an agency back in the day. We were web design, we did pretty much everything, but mainly focused on digital, but we didn't have any kind of an industry expertise. So we were, for the most part, only able to sell to local customers in our very small market that we were in. And we always wanted to expand out of that market and sell to companies, brands in bigger cities, but we weren't able to attract them because they're like, why wouldn't they just hire their, an agency down the street that does the same thing? So enter the niche, right? If you are the agency that specializes in shoe brands for e-commerce, then you're going to be able to attract customers from all around the world if they fit within your niche, right? Because they go, oh, I want to hire that agency. They have really specialized knowledge and experience. And one of the analogies that I always liked was if you just got the Porsche account, if you're an agency, who's the photographer you're going to hire? The one who does weddings, and portraits, or are you going to hire the one that just does luxury cars, right? Obviously, you're going to hire the specialist one. So what's interesting about that is what Alex James wrote in this LinkedIn post, which was that it's not enough anymore to be a niche agency. And the reason why, he kind of breaks it down. So the idea is you flee from the competition by limiting what you do and who you do it for. So if I limit what I do, then I can get really industry specific and be a specialist, and that's different from being industry agnostic or a generalist. But the problem with that is it worked. Everybody did it. And so unsolvable problems started solving themselves. What happened was that the total number of agencies skyrocketed. So it 53% growth over 5 years. So there's just more agencies now than there ever have been. And clients are now demanding partners with at least one focus area. So that means that every agency, and there's now more agencies, they've all niched down. So that isn't even enough to separate you from the crowd. And he quotes Rory Sutherland, who said, the fatal issue with logic is that it always leads you to the same place as your competitors. And Rory's right. The momentum led to an overpopulation of specialists. The evidence isn't hard to find. So what comes next then? If you're not a niche agency, what can you be? And this is where I think Alex James made some really great points. So like he says, let's be clear, you should niche down, but when the competitive edge grows dull, you're left with 3 options. You can either hold your nose and niche down further, commit to a forever war with direct competitors, or develop your own perspective. Only one of these gets you anywhere. So then what he does is he uses examples of authors. So here's the idea is that if you look at some of the most successful business books that have come out in the last 10 years, they almost always have a really unique perspective about, whatever the common wisdom is, the common knowledge is, they're saying the opposite of that thing. So the example he gives is Chris Voss. Chris Voss, who wrote Never Split the Difference, book on negotiations, had a different title before, and his book only really started selling when it was called Never Split the Difference, because Never Split the Difference is like, common negotiation knowledge would be like, oh yeah, meet them halfway. So Never Split the Difference was like a really strong, bold point of view. He also gives the example of April Dunford, who we've actually hired before to do our positioning at Proposify. So she does like positioning for tech companies, but the thing with April is that she didn't invent positioning, and a lot of what her actual content is, and her book obviously Awesome talks about this, is that like the way people do positioning is wrong, generally speaking. People always think of positioning as being like a statement, a mission statement, or a brand. It gets confused with brand promises and all those kind of things. So she makes it really clear that the way positioning is done at tech companies is broken, and here's how to do it the right way. And then she has a framework for how to do it, starting with competing alternatives. A really great example that I want to share too is Ross Simmons. On LinkedIn, Ross, is well known in the digital marketing world. So Ross runs a content agency. As long as I've known Ross, he's always said, distribute, don't create, right? Like that was always his motto, is that the way people do content marketing is they focus all their efforts on writing content and they spend comparatively little effort on distributing it. And his point of view is that you get more value from distributing your content than you do from creating it. And he actually came out with his first book last year called Create Once, Distribute Forever. And that book is his point of view on the market, which is, put more effort into distribution. That point of view is what separates him and his agency from maybe other content marketing agencies that are specialized in B2B SaaS, which his is. So going back to Alex James's post, it says so instead of calling out your client's flaws, call out your category's failings, but don't stop there, because a worthwhile perspective doesn't just criticize your industry's broken business practices, it burns them down and builds what's next. And, I think this applies for agencies. I think this also applies for many other categories of business, right? Even if you're a SaaS business or a software business, what he said about logic always leads you and your competitors to the same place. I mean, that's where most software companies go, right? They all have the same products and the same features. What's different is sometimes having an opinion. And I think the Basecamp founders do this really well, Jason Fried and DHH, is that, they'll refuse to build certain features that people want. Like it or not, there's the people that gravitate towards Basecamp and their whole philosophy because they like the fact that they have a point of view, and they'll never be as big as maybe an Asana or a ClickUp or some of these other big funded SaaS platforms who will build every product feature that every customer asks for. Hope you enjoyed watching this video. I share advice just like this in my newsletter inside Proposify. You can get it by clicking the link down below.